All right, we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your participation and your interest. My name is Michael Steinberger. I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a platform dedicated to promoting the story of Sepharad, which refers to the Jews of the Iberian Peninsula, nowadays Spain and Portugal. This is the first in a series of live interviews we are bringing you this week, featuring a stellar lineup of people with intimate knowledge and connection to the saga of Sepharad. I would like to thank and acknowledge Hope Network for partnering with us on these interviews. Our first special guest this afternoon is Dr. Peter Tarlow. Amongst many and diverse academic accomplishments, Dr. Tarlow is a renowned expert in the Sepharad narrative, and as such, an important speaker on this topic. I would be remiss if I did not mention that Peter was the director and rabbi of Texas A&M Hillel for 30 years. Upon retiring in 2013, Peter assumed the leadership of the Center of Latino Jewish Relations. Tarlow writes a weekly bilingual social religious commentary that is read throughout the Americas. And if that's not enough, Peter is also a scholar in the area of tourism safety and founder of Tourism and More, Inc. So good afternoon, Peter. And thank you.
Good morning from Texas. Good afternoon, Florida.
Okay, so I can't think of a better speaker to introduce our audience to the saga of Sepharad and its profound consequences. So let's get going.
You're going to make me blush there, but thank you for a really nice introduction. And I wasn't really sure how you wanted me to dress, so I decided that all clothing has symbolism. So I decided to wear the yellow of Spain, because the colors of Sepharad are Spain and orange. But I couldn't really find an orange tie. So instead I have a black and yellow one with the letters Chai. And I figure that Chai made sense because Chai, as you know, in Hebrew means life. It's a kind of a symbolism of continuity. And I figure that today's discussion is really about continuity. So the tie and the shirt symbolize the whole effort that we're trying to put together.
Sounds like a good starting point. So let's get going. I would say, if you would, Peter, give us a background, how you got involved with the story of Sepharad, what was the reason that you got involved with this narrative?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back, and I'm going to go back to when I was in ninth grade, which was a long, long time ago, in the 1960s. And I was taking my first Spanish course. And my professor, my teacher, you don't have professors in junior high school, told me I got a C in Spanish. And my mother came in to speak to the teacher, good Jewish mother. And the teacher said, well, he's not very good in languages, so he probably should take the first 2 years and then go on to something else because this is not his forte. Well, that upset me so much that I decided by the end of that first year, in other words, by the end of ninth grade, I was fluent in Spanish. And by the end of 10th grade, my Spanish was better than my teacher's. So that kind of propelled me into doing all sorts of things that I never thought I'd do. I ended up in college, one of my undergraduate degrees was in Spanish literature. And that was a time that I learned tremendously about also the Jewish influences and the Hebrew influences, especially on early Spanish literature in the 9th and 10th centuries, and its influence on actually both the development of the Spanish language and on Spanish literature. When I got to rabbinical school, I ended up, at the end you have to write a thesis dealing with some area of specialty. My Jewish specialty was Jewish history, and my professor really didn't give me much choice. He said, you speak Spanish and you speak Portuguese. You're going to work in this area. So I wasn't sure I wanted to or not, but I wanted to get through rabbinical school. So that was basically, it was a non-option. Well, each time I would kind of walk away from it, I would end up being pulled back one way or the other. So when I was in rabbinical school, I wanted to work in a small Spanish-speaking congregation in someplace in Latin America as a volunteer. I ended up, there are 23 countries in Latin America. Approximately 22 speak Spanish. One speaks Portuguese. Due to the brilliance of Jewish bureaucracy, I ended up in the only country whose language I couldn't speak, which was Brazil. I ended up not in a small village, but I ended up in a very big small village called Sao Paulo, which is the largest city in Latin America, in South America. I wanted to be in a small congregation. I ended up in a congregation called Congregação Israelita Paulista, better known as CIPI in Portuguese. And it was a small congregation, about 3,000 families. I ran a youth group of 10th to 12th graders of 3,000 people. And I had no choice, but I had to learn Portuguese. So before I knew it, I spoke both Spanish and Portuguese. That inspired me to write a dissertation on the Jews of Portugal. And I still know Portuguese Jewish history extremely well. I got to about 1503 when the Jews got expelled. And that's when we stopped the dissertation because so if you ask me about Lisbon prior to 1503, I can tell you all the streets. And then that kind of became quiescent for a while. And I went on to do other things. I have a PhD in counterterrorism. I work in security around the world. I'm head of the African Tourism Board security for 57 countries in Africa. And I always continued to read and speak Spanish, but it wasn't really, and I learned Latino. It wasn't the top of my priority. And then as the rabbi at Texas A&M for about 12 years ago, we decided, a friend of mine asked me if I would co-sponsor a lecture on someone by the name of Luis de Carvajal. Now I know Luis de Carvajal very well because he was the governor of the state, the first governor of the state of Nuevo León in Mexico. It's not that far from the Texas border. I have lots of friends in Monterrey. And we decided to do some sort of academic seminar. Well, if you could do it wrong, we did it wrong. We did it on a Thursday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on the 4th floor of the Texas A&M library where there was no parking. I figured to add to that, it had a terrible rainstorm. And I assumed that maybe it would be me, my colleague, and perhaps 3 other people. My wife would show up and a few other people just out of support. Well, much to my shock, we had almost 250 people who came. And I said, wow, I missed a major academic area. So we tried another one. And again, it continued to be incredibly successful. We started drawing people from all over Texas. And to add to that, people started finding me and they'd say to me, I have really strange things. We're definitely not Jewish, but we somehow always seem to light candles on Friday night. Or my family has a tradition that eating pork on Friday night and Saturday will make you sick. So we avoid all pork products Friday night to Saturday. Or other strange things like that. The 15th of September became a fast day. And well, of course, I immediately recognized some of these things. I had become friends with some of the people in New Mexico who were also doing studies on crypto Jews. And I decided to found the center. In those days, it was called the Center for Crypto Jewish Studies. And some way that people could find me, one way or the other. And it was usually stories of people telling me something in their past. Some of the people wanted to learn more. Some of the people wanted, just wanted to let me know for whatever reason. And I discovered there was this whole cadre of people, especially in the heartland of the crypto Jewish world is Southern Texas, what we call the Valley here, which has no borders, but every Texan knows where it is. New Mexico, parts of Arizona, and extremely small parts of California. But those are really the heartland. But Texas is truly the heartland. On both sides, on the Texas side, we call it the Rio Grande. On the Mexican side, it's called the Rio Bravo. The states of Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, especially a little bit Chihuahua, are really heartland issues. So before I knew it, we were running all sorts of interesting and fascinating things. And I became friends with other people. I discovered there was a whole world of people who were really interested in the Americas. It wasn't so much the story of Spanish Jews per se, but it was really the story of Mexican, Southwestern American Jews, or not Jews, but of really non-Jews who were finding their roots one way or the other. Some would be interested, some would not be interested. So that kind of led me into whole new areas that I hadn't really expected. About 8 years ago, a colleague of mine who really worked in politics, it was called JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security, a small group in Texas, in Houston, Texas, was chatting with me. And I said, you know, you have a small group and I have a small group. Why don't we merge them together? And that's when we created the Center for Latino-Jewish Relations, where we work with people really in three areas. One, in showing Latinos their Jewish heritage and why they should support Israel. So we're definitely a very open Zionist organization that wants to show the Latino community the importance of Israel to their own knowledge. Secondly, we want the Jewish community to be somewhat knowledgeable about the issues in the Latino community. It has to be a two-way street. And one of the things we're doing is we're creating housing projects on the border for poor people who, for people who need assisted housing in the Rio Grande Valley. And that's been a beautiful mitzvah to help people along the way. And then we have an educational arm where we speak at both churches and universities. It tends to be more universities than churches, but a number of churches also, dealing with the whole issue of the history of how we call it de donde somos, where did we come from? And how did these people come to Mexico, come to the southern part of the United States? And what is their Sephardic heritage? So in order to be able to tell the story of Mexican Jews, of Latin American Jews, you also have to know the study of Sephardic Jews. So I had the academic knowledge from my studies in rabbinical school. I placed those with the knowledge of the needs of the local population, because unlike Florida, which really does not, it has some crypto Jews, which is now the technical term, but it's not the heartland. It's a kind of a suburb. The heartland is Texas. And basically sat from the area of San Antonio on the north to about Monterrey in the state of Nuevo León in Mexico, where people really speak a form of Ladino, even though they call it Spanish, but it's really closer to Ladino. So that's how I got involved. It's really all started in 9th grade with getting a C in Spanish. So that's a very long answer to a very short question.
Can you talk a little bit about the hands-on experience, in your assistance in terms of some of these Bnei Anusim, the crypto Jews? I know you from the conversions.
Sure. So, you know, each person is different. Each person has their own experience. I'm going to first talk the group, and then I'll give you a few individual stories. So on the group level, today I run synagogues in Mexicali, which is across the border from El Centro, California. Mexicali is in the state of Baja California. In Huánuco, Peru. In Cochabamba, Bolivia. So that I'm running right now because of Zoom, via Zoom, 3 synagogues across Latin America. Almost all of these are people who have converted into Judaism, and they come from really 3 groups. Maybe the story of Huánuco is the best. It was about 12 years ago, maybe earlier. I got a call on Rosh Hashanah morning. Now, it's very rare to get a call on Rosh Hashanah morning. But as my father was elderly, and in those days we couldn't identify where calls came from, I thought, oh, maybe something's, I need to answer this phone, because I kind of lived expecting a tragic phone call any moment. And I answered the phone, and you could hear in those days when a phone call came from abroad. And it was from Peru. And I'm saying, and they asked me, they said, we got your name from Jews in Guatemalan Jewish Indians, whom I knew. and they had, I known them from people working with people in Veracruz, Mexico. And we need to form a Jewish community. Well, I said, okay, it's Rosh Hashanah today. I'm not going to talk to you, but call me in 2 days and we'll organize it. And what I wanted to see if they were serious. So I said, I will come down and talk with you, but you have to pay for the ticket and you'll have to pay for my expenses. I won't charge you, but it has to be a wash. And really what I was interested in is not the $800 ticket. I was interested in seeing if they were serious or not. And I got there. It was over the Christmas break, and I use the word Christmas on purpose. I'll explain that in a second. And I discovered there were really 3 groups that had come together, which shows where we are today in Latin America. One was a group of people who clearly were Jews from the Sephardic experience and who had maintained secretly or did not know, but they knew something was in their heritage from the 15th or 16th century in Spain. One group were German Jews who had gone up the Amazon River, and they were were not allowed to marry in Peru except in a Catholic church, and they just assimilated. And so these were people who were finding their Jewish heritage from going up the Amazon River from Brazil and ending up in Peru. And one group were people who really had nothing to do with Judaism, but had just started to read about Judaism on the internet and kind of liked it. And so there was just kind of 3 different currents came together to create something. The reason I said Christmas is because I was there that year and it was Christmas. And I said to them, we have to find someplace to eat. And they said, oh, well, the one place we thought of going to was a Chinese restaurant. And they said that, haha, now I know you really are secret Jews. Because I figured if you know something about the Jewish world, Jewish Christmas always composed of a movie and Chinese restaurants. So when they said that to me, I said, we can go for it. So that's kind of like a personal story. Let me give you another story. When I was at A&M, people would call me all the time. Remember, again, it was on Rosh Hashanah, and a woman called me and said, I have to speak to you. And I said, it's 10 minutes before people are coming for Rosh Hashanah dinner. And then I have services. I'll speak to you in 2 days. I have to speak to you today. And anyway, I said, okay, I'll speak to you 10 minutes prior to services. And she said, okay, I'll give you 7 minutes. And in that she said, I grew up as a Catholic. I always thought I was a Catholic. Just before I came to the United States, my uncle took me into a room and told me the history of my family and that I was really secretly Jewish. And I didn't know it. And now I don't know who I am. And I said, okay. And that's very typical of people in the crypto-Jewish world. They're not knowing of who they are. So I said, okay, come to services and we will discuss this afterwards. Bottom line, she did convert. She became the head of her, or I don't really call it conversion, I call it re-entry into Judaism because, but they do have to go through a course of study, et cetera, et cetera. She re-entered the Jewish world, became the head of the Jewish Lawyers Association at her university, married, has 4 kids, and one of her children ended up many years later becoming the president of Texas A&M Hillel. So it was a good telephone call that I took. But I have people like that every week. Still, people call me consistently asking for help, trying to find out who am I, what am I. Some of those people want to convert. Some of those people just want to know a little bit more about themselves. Some of those people want to kind of become a friend of the Jewish people, but they really don't know what they want to be. So you're going to get a wide range of people. We really don't have a good handle on how many people. The Jewish world tends to come up with all sorts of fantastic numbers, which may or may not be true. And one of the things that we really need to do in this whole area is begin to understand correctly what are the real facts, who are these people. Is it one group of anusim, which is a Hebrew word, or really we should call them bnei anusim because anusim means people who were raped. So bnei anusim are the people who were raped spiritually. We should try to understand, are they desirous of being Jewish, not desirous? Do they want to just know something about their heritage? That's a whole area that we're going to have to begin to look at to really explore academically and not just wishful thinking.
You know, being that you are the first in the series of these interviews, I'm wondering if we can digress for a minute, because we jumped right into the thick of it all, the sort of the
Sure.
consequence. Do you feel comfortable going back a bit and just for the sake of our audience, discuss the whole Converso issue, how it comes about?
Sure. Yeah, very, very quickly. I mean, this could be a 2-hour lecture, and we don't have time for a 2-hour lecture.
Right.
So very shortly, Jews come to Spain whenever you want to say they came. In other words, we have no documentation. We know that around the 3rd century, the 4th century, 300s, the Visigoths conquered Spain and converted to Judaism, converted to Christianity, and created a series of anti-Jewish measures. And that took place from the middle of the 4th century to the beginnings of the 8th century. The Muslims come in at the very beginning of the 8th century, and Jews are not, textbooks say it's a golden age. It really was not a golden age. That's a misnomer, but it was certainly an age of less bad than it was under the Christians. We'll put it that way. And there was and academically, the Jewish world expanded tremendously. Now, by 1492, the Christians had completed what's called La Reconquista. And starting in about 100 years prior, there had been a series of anti-Jewish pogroms that started in the south of Spain and worked its way up to about Barcelona, to probably just north of Barcelona today. And Jews had basically 2 choices, many of these people. One was to accept death. One was to run away. And many people said, you know, I'm a lousy Catholic Jew. I'm a lousy Catholic. What's the difference? You know, I'll just be, and we're willing to go to the baptismal font and convert it. Some of those people, many of those people, once they converted, said, okay, enough. I'm done with it. And one of the things I think is so important for us to understand is that Spain in the 12th to the 15th century is very similar to the United States. If you ask the question, if someone put a gun to someone's head today in the Jewish community, how many people would accept the bullet versus how many people would convert quickly? And so one of the things we say it's a golden age, it was a golden age of literature. It was not necessarily a golden age of spirituality. And to a great extent, many Jews in Spain were Jews because that's all they could be. Once they were forced out of it, that group now, which we call the Anusim, it divides into really 3 groups. One group which could care less, one group that became sincere Catholics, and one group that practiced, really felt guilty about what they did, and they practiced Judaism secretly while being on the outside, being Christian or Catholic. Many of the people who were most sincere fled, and they went both in the end of the, but especially in the 15th century, 1492, they fled to Portugal. Some went to Turkey, some were captured, and some got to Morocco, where there's still a Jewish community. But the great majority went to Portugal, which was across the border. Portugal was willing to let them come in. But because of a series of political consequences, my grandfather always said, whatever happens in the world, it's always bad for the Jews. So there it was. And Portugal forces Jews to convert rather than to leave. Some of those, but the Jews of Portugal were much more loyal Jews than many of the Jews in Spain. The people who come to Mexico or to Latin America tended to be Spanish/Portuguese Jews. In other words, Spanish Jews who had fled to Portugal, many had Portuguesized their names. So a name like Mendes, Mendes, is the Portuguese format of DEZ. The EZ was the mark of the Inquisition showing Jewish blood. And even today, if you travel through the villages of northern Mexico, if someone will say to you, oh, ¿Cuántos portugueses viven en esta aldea? How many Portuguese live in this village? They're not referring to people who are citizens of Portugal. They're referring to Jews. So the word Portuguese and Jew became interlocking. So we really have among the Anusim today a number of different groupings. We have some who did get to Italy. Interestingly enough, the Pope was against the Inquisition. And therefore you were able to get to the Papal States. Some got to Greece, especially Salonika, which was a very thriving Sephardic community until the Nazis killed most of the people. Many got to Turkey. Many got to Brazil. Some got to Mexico. And of course, the Brazilian Jewish community is the founder of the American Jewish community, because they were under the Dutch, they were allowed in Pernambuco to be freely, openly Jewish. And then when the Portuguese came back, most people went back to Amsterdam. One group gets to Curaçao, Mikveh Israel, which is the oldest functioning synagogue in the New World. And one small group, was really crazy, gets to a place called Manhattan, which is obviously Manhattan. And they want to get off, and Peter Stuyvesant says, you can't, because I don't want any Jews here. He did us a big favor because they refused to go back to Holland. The Dutch West India Company said he had to let them in. He said under two conditions, actually three conditions. One, that they don't bury their dead next to Christians. Two, that they take the defense of the Manhattan Island against the Brooklyn Indians. And three, that they build their own hospitals. The Jewish hospital system today is because of Peter Stuyvesant. And if it hadn't been for Peter Stuyvesant, it was the first time that Jews had arms since the defeat at Masada. And when it came time for the American Revolution, Jews were already well integrated into the United States, so much so that if you remember, George Washington read the freedom of religion, the First Amendment, was read at the Touro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. So ironically, if it hadn't been for an anti-Peter Stuyvesant or the expulsion from Portugal and Brazil, we probably would not have the First Amendment and freedom of religion in the United States today.
So I guess as a follow-up, from your perspective, why do you think this whole unfolding story or phenomena of the Converso or the Bnei Anusim, why do you think that's relevant today to both the American Jews and even the Latino community here in America?
Well, I think we do it backwards. The Latino community, it's clearly relevant because we don't know exactly, but there are guesstimates that it may be from 20% to 40% of the Latino community has Jewish blood. And so this is really part of their heritage. When I bring people to Israel from the Latino community, I always say to them, I want you to tell me what's different about being in this country than any other foreign country you visited. And at the end of the trip, they all say to me, we kind of felt like we were home. Everybody was just like us. And I said, that's because you were. And so for many Latinos, this is a chance to regain something that was stolen from them in an area that was kept out of their history and refinding themselves. From the general American Jewish community, now, most Jews really were Sephardic. It's only after a series of pogroms and other things that the Ashkenazi community became larger. But in reality, the Ashkenazi community was always less productive and smaller and a little brother to the Sephardic community historically. One of the things, but in the United States, the great majority of Jews are Ashkenazic because they come out of Russia or Poland or wherever they came from. And we're less knowledgeable about the Sephardic side of the world than the Ashkenazic side. For the American Jewish community, so much of our life and so much of our mistakes are parallel to what took place in Spain. Issues of assimilation, issues of lack of loyalty, issues of being so certain that nothing could happen to you that you're unprepared to defend yourself. And so one of the important parts historically for the American Jewish community is learning from the past. Don't make the same mistakes. try to build yourself up in a way that the Sephardic Jews of Spain prior to 1492 did not do. And where did they fail? In many ways today we parallel. We have great Jewish literature. We have thriving Jewish academic world. We haven't done as well on touching the spiritual sense of people. And so that's an important area. The other part of it is, and again, we don't know the numbers, so we have to be really careful. But we lost 6 million people in the Holocaust. I cannot bring those people back, no matter what I want. But you know what? There are tremendous new opportunities for the Jewish world to find people who might be interested in rejoining the Jewish world and replenishing numbers in a way that a gift from God. The real issue will be dealing with Orthodox rabbis who seem to want to put as many obstacles in the way as possible. And if we can get past that issue, I think we have tremendous openings. It is very, very difficult in Latin America because of the Orthodox establishment does everything it can to make life as difficult as possible. And so that is a real challenge that has to be looked at. By the way, there was the same challenge that took place in Spain in the 13th and 14th centuries. So again, we're seeing the same issue of intolerance within the Jewish community and lack of flexibility in helping people find who they are.
I think it's a good point to bring this full circle. So I'm going to sort of bring this to a conclusion and ask you just if a closing thought, just to bring this all together.
Oh, you want me to give you a closing thought?
Meaning, you've just identified that there's an opportunity and a challenge. Your suggestions as to how do we go forward from this point?
So first of all, I think the Jewish world, as we live in crises, and we certainly have other crises. The word crisis is defined as the merging of opportunity and danger. We can either seize the opportunity or deal with the danger. That's something we as a Jewish community have got to think through. Are we going to be creative? Are we going to take the time to learn about all parts of our heritage? Or do we want to become a small Amish type people that's totally irrelevant on the face of the earth? If today I send out a flyer about Israeli firefighters going to California to help the people in California. And it's kind of known as Or LaGoyim, a light to the nations. I guess in the fire, it's almost an Eish LaGoyim, a fire to the nations. If we are really going to be an Or LaGoyim, there is no Judaism without Jews. And this is a chance for some people who would like to become part of that Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition, that will allow the Jewish people to go from strength to even greater strength. That's these days, just before Rosh Hashanah, when we just went yesterday through Slichot, it's a time to really say, do we need to turn to ourselves and say, please God, forgive us for the sin of ignoring our brethren?
That's a powerful closing point, and that's what I was looking for. So at this point, I'd like to thank you, Peter, for sharing with us your story and your views. I also would like to thank our viewers and invite you to join our upcoming interviews. We continue this afternoon at 2:00 with Rabbi Ventura from Synagoga Without Borders, Synagoga Sin Fronteras, Synagogue Without Borders. And those of you who want to follow us, I invite you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website for upcoming events and the continued series of discussions. Thank you very much, Peter.
Michael, before you end, I'd just like to say that if anyone would like to learn about the Center for Latino Jewish Relations, they can contact me at P. Tarlow, my name's up there, at latinojewishRelations.org. .org, not .com. So P. Tarlow.
We'll make that available to everybody.
Okay, great. All right. I wish everybody Shana Tova U'Metuka, we need a good and sweet new year, because this has been, I think we all agree, it's time to say goodbye to 5780.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Peter. Shana Tova.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.